Hello, you're watching Deep Dive with me, Uday Pratap Singh. While the global attention today remains on United States' invasion of Venezuela and the arrest of Maduro, did you know that it was once the same United States which protected Latin America against colonizing activities? Donald Trump, while announcing the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, spoke of the 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine. Here's what he said.
Potentially in league with the cartels operating along our border. All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal.
So what is the Monroe Doctrine? This is the 203-year-old paper laid out by the then United States President in 1823. James Monroe was the 5th President of the United States between 1817 and 1825. This was a time when the United States wasn't a global superpower and had the constant threat of dealing with European powers in the Americas. Before understanding why the doctrine was articulated, let's understand what it contains, based on a speech given by Monroe in 1823. U.S. would not enter European conflicts. Existing European colonies in the Americas would remain untouched. No new European colonization would be allowed. Attempt to control countries in the Western Hemisphere would be treated as a hostile act against the U.S. Well, this is the map of the Western Hemisphere in the ancient world. It contained both Latin America and North America countries. In the 1820s, 10 Latin American countries gained independence from European colonial powers. Mexico declared independence from Spain. Brazil got independence from Portugal in 1822. Gran Colombia, Peru and Bolivia gained independence from Spain, and the United Provinces of Central America, which split into present-day Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua and Costa Rica. The Monroe Doctrine was the United States' clear message to Europe of no further expansionist activities in the Americas. In return, the U.S. said it would not interfere in European affairs. The idea was straightforward. Europe would stay out of the Americas and the Americas would remain free from European control. The Monroe Doctrine was presented as a policy of non-interference and respect for sovereignty. The doctrine was shaped largely by Monroe's Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, who later became president himself. Its purpose was to protect newly independent nations in Latin America, safeguard U.S. strategic interests, and prevent rival powers, including Russia, from expanding their influence in the region. Over the years, the Monroe Doctrine became a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. In 1865, American diplomats used it to support Mexico's President Benito Juarez in his struggle against French Emperor Maximilian. At that stage, the doctrine was still defensive in nature, aimed mainly at blocking European influence. However, the meaning of the Monroe Doctrine began to change in the early 20th century. President Theodore Roosevelt expanded it to justify U.S. military intervention across Latin America. This expansion, known as the Roosevelt Corollary, allowed Washington to step in when it believed instability in neighboring countries threatened U.S. interests. From that point on, the doctrine was no longer only about keeping Europe out of the Americas. It increasingly became a justification for American intervention within the region. During the Cold War, the Monroe Doctrine was frequently used to counter Soviet influence in Latin America. The United States supported friendly governments, backed coups, and intervened directly or indirectly in several countries. Critics argue that the use of the doctrine often destabilized left-wing governments that were not aligned with U.S. interests, sometimes at the cost of democracy and regional stability. That brings us to the present. Now, not only has the interpretation changed, but Trump has renamed the doctrine as Donro Doctrine, calling it the original one an outdated document. Unlike the original Monroe Doctrine, which focused on preventing external interference in the Americas, the Donro Doctrine signals a willingness to take direct military action against governments the United States considers dangerous. It represents a shift from deterrence to enforcement and from influence to intervention. What began in 1823 as a warning to empires has now in 2026 became a justification for action. Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is live with us on the broadcast. Madhav Nalapat, does the Monroe Doctrine have no relevance anymore in 2026 for the United States of America?
Well, Uday, it should not, for a simple reason that all of us thought that the age of colonialism was long over. But I think Trump would have been very happy if 200 years ago. The Monroe Doctrine is more than 200 years old. and the reality is it gives the United States of America the right to take control of whatever assets there are in South America. Now, that is the Monroe Doctrine, and now that is called by Trump the Donro Doctrine, and he says it's even more strengthened and expanded. Well, I mean, kidnapping presidents and bringing them to trial and whatever may be a refinement of the Monroe Doctrine. But I can tell you that the age of colonialism is now back, and back literally with a bang from the skies. United States jets and United States other helicopters attacking air bases and other facilities in Venezuela. The reality is what Monroe wanted and what Trump wants is the resources are the resources of Latin America. So it's very clear his objective is not to stop at Venezuela, but to go further and further. The whole of Latin America will be covered, just as was covered by the Monroe Doctrine. So I personally feel it's a wake-up call for the entire South American continent, and it's a wake-up call for external powers to see if they will stand by while this kind of colonial subjugation takes place. Again, I would say very honestly that what we are seeing here is Trump's assertion of the right of the United States to have the plunder and loot the riches of South America.
Yes.
And in Venezuela, that means oil and rare earths.
Is this then going to be a precedence, for this reinterpretation of the doctrine with regards to other countries as well seen as potentially quote-unquote inimical?
Look, any country apart from the United States is deemed by the Donro Doctrine to be committing a hostile act and subject therefore to kinetic action. Any country. Trump has reserved that space entirely to the United States of America, led by him, and to no other country. So very frankly, Uday, it's a very scary thought for many people in many countries who thought they had shed the colonial yoke, and now they find it coming back in a renamed fashion in South America. So quite honestly, I want to ask, what happens if other major powers assert themselves in the same way? What if China says that according to the Shiro Doctrine, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, all these countries have got to be subjugated to China and basically do what China wants them to do? It would be an untenable situation. It would be a clear breach of any kind of international law and a return to a law of the jungle. So quite frankly, Uday, the stakes are immense, and what is happening in Venezuela will play out over the next several weeks, if not months, before a climax is reached. And by that climax, either
Yes.
it becomes clear that Trump has been pushed back from this ambitious goal,
Okay.
or succeeded, and that's quite a major situation to happen. Thank you.
All right, Professor Nalapath, appreciate you joining us with your perspective on this segment.